welcome everybody. Sean Haney, your host here on RealAg Live. Thanks a lot for tuning in today. We're going to have a lot of fun talking about some of the big ag policy issues that are impacting farmers from coast to coast, from the Maritimes all the way to British Columbia and everywhere in between. I want to mention to everybody, if you have a question or comment, you can put it in the chat box, whether you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook. I'm going to bring in the guest right now. It is Mary Robinson. Mary, how are you?
I'm great, Sean. How are you?
Good. We're getting a little bit of feedback. Do you have some, for some reason, do you have some earphones or maybe plug in that headset? Let's try that while I...
Oh, yeah. I don't have a headset. Hang on, though. I will try to connect my wireless earbuds seamlessly, which I cannot normally do seamlessly.
Okay. Well, while Mary's doing that, I want to mention that, yeah, there is a lot of issues that are impacting farmers and ranchers across this country right now. And really the plate is quite full. You know, Mary and I kind of went back and forth on email and said, you know, what do we want to talk about? What are some of the things that are really, really important to address? And there's a lot of them. And we've only got about 30 minutes here, but we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. Mary, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can, but you're really quiet all of a sudden.
That's not like me.
You know what I'm going to have you do, Mary, is go back to what you're setting before and come back in and I'll let you back into the show. Okay?
Okay.
So click back on the link. Okay, Mary's going to come back. I can handle this. What is a question here? It's a shame there isn't a US-based version of this channel. Sorry, Sam. It's all things Canada here. We do our best. There's a lot of stuff that does apply to people in the U.S., of course. You should check out The Agronomists on Monday night, 8 o'clock Eastern. It is definitely one of the shows that may very much appeal to you. Let's try to bring Mary in here again. Hey, Mary, can you hear me now?
Okay, I'm trying a different mic. Is this one better?
I think it sounds better, yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay. Let's get to it here, Mary. I want to, and as I mentioned, Mary Robinson is the president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. Mary, let's start off with this, TFWs. We've seen some very, very strong travel restrictions put in place. I all of a sudden did a bit of a uh-oh when I saw reduction of travel, no flights to Mexico or the Caribbean. How does this impact TFWs getting to Canada on time?
Right. So we have seen a pretty good flow of TFWs up until now, and we're still kind of sorting through a bit of some new challenges with these new travel restrictions that you've mentioned, Sean. And we're still working with all orders of government and public health and trying to navigate all that. It's obviously incredibly important for us all to be able to access these international workers. They're so integrated with our food supply system. So the details are a little fuzzy on if the isolation for 3 days in a hotel is going to apply to agriculture. We're trying to get some clarity on that. And obviously what's important for CFA and all of our member organizations is to make sure that we're on the right side of it. We don't want to do anything that's going to speed up the spread of COVID. We want to do exactly the opposite. And obviously on a farm, the last thing you want to do is introduce someone to the rest of your farm population that's COVID positive. So we're all for making sure that people are COVID free when they get on farm. But what we have to make sure is that any of these new requirements that come into play, that we're not expected for farmers to pick up the tab on that, because obviously margins are pretty tight and some farms have a lot of workers, and if we're faced with a $2,000 bill per worker in addition to the already high costs, including what's most likely going to be more expensive flights to get people here, it's going to be fairly devastating. So we're hoping, and we're getting some signals from AFC that they understand this and they're going to go to bat for us.
So, fill us in here, because some of us aren't as familiar with how many TFWs are working at some of these farms. Could some of these farms have anywhere from like 50 to 100 TFWs,
Sure.
or is it more?
Yeah, so I know farms that would share one TFW, trade a person kind of within season. And I know of farms that would have in excess of 500 workers. So Obviously, the top line for a business that's looking at one farm worker is going to be a lot different than the top line for that farm that's got 500 or more workers, and an expense of 500 workers times $2,000, that's $1 million hit on a farm of that size, which is no small potatoes.
I see what you did there. Being from PEI, your potato comment. Okay, so is there a possibility of an exemption for that hotel stay if they stay on farm in the barracks?
Well, I th- there could be. We won't know until we find out. That's how these things go. But obviously, the more important message is that we want to make sure that we are on the right side of the regulations, that public health is endorsing what we're doing, that what we're doing is not putting undue financial pressure on farms, but it's also protecting farms as well as all Canadians against the spread of COVID.
One of the notes that you sent me, Mary, on the TFW file was labor beyond TFWs. I'm super curious what you have in mind here because I think there's a lot of farms that have been using TFWs, kind of taking TFWs that this supply sort of maybe for granted or that assuming it would always be that, there for them to use. Doesn't feel so sure now. So what does labor beyond TFWs look like in your mind?
So I think it's important to clarify that farmers haven't kind of it's been easy so we get temporary farm workers. I would say just the contrary. I don't know any farmer who would rather bring someone in from a foreign country than go down the road and find someone who's going to show up at work every day and do a good job. It's expensive, setting up bunkhouses, going through all of the LMI, going through all the expense. It's and then ultimately being responsible for someone who's in your care from a foreign country. This is not a something someone takes on without recognizing the size of the commitment. So looking forward, I think CFA has been calling for a national ag labor strategy, and the wording's changed a little bit with COVID, and now we say a national ag labor and automation strategy, because obviously COVID has, as you say, highlighted just how precarious the ability of people to just travel internationally is. And going forward, we don't know what the new normal is going to look like once we get to that point where we kind of see COVID in the rearview mirror. What else is coming at us? So we've got to make sure that we've got something domestically that's going to remove this vulnerability we have on labor. So we're hoping and we've heard positive things from Minister Bibeau on labor and recognizing that the shortage that we have and the numbers are fairly staggering as to losses to primary producers due to labor shortages. It's in excess of $2.5 billion to primary production alone from unfilled jobs. So there's lots of opportunity for government to get involved here. We would hope that they would recognize the Canadian Ag HR Council, chaired by Cyr Couturier, Portia McDonald-Dewhurst. I think you've spoken with Portia. She's the executive director, and they've done some excellent work on labor. So we're hopeful that government's going to really clamp onto them and have them do some meaningful work on this national ag labor and automation strategy.
Well, some might say that trying to convince Canadians to do some of this work is like trying to push a rope uphill. So automation is really one of our only choices. Now that is easier in some areas of the sector than others, but it feels like, and based on the fact it was added to that framework, it sounds like that's becoming more of an option that people are exploring.
Yeah, I think COVID has really forced a lot of technology. I mean, how many meetings did you do in 2019 via Zoom compared to what you did in 2020? And
Yeah.
we've really changed how we work. How many people now work from home? How many people, obviously on farm it's a little different, but we are seeing technology really kind of hitting a different trajectory.
BRM, let's talk business risk management. We've seen now a series of two deadlines. We had a deadline before the end of the year. We had a public deadline that was the end of January for provinces that were still outside the acceptance to say, we're not necessarily that we're in, but we're still looking at it. Like, we're interested. We may not have approval yet for the extra millions of dollars, but we are still potentially looking at it. It feels like that deadline has whooshed by as well, and not much has changed. Mary, where are we at on BRM reform?
So I've coined a new phrase, BRM fatigue. We've all talked about COVID
Yeah.
fatigue. I think a lot of us are really there with BRM fatigue. But I certainly haven't lost hope in us getting this across the finish line, because when we look at BRM right now, we have a very short window between now and April 1st, 2023, where the next APF comes into play. But that timeline, it's very important that we have something meaningful right now. And I think it's important to say thank you to Minister Bibeau for really delivering new money. First new money we've seen on the table since 2013. And I really thank her for that, putting the pressure on the provinces to sign on. We know there are some provinces that are reluctant, but we're continuing to, through our member organizations, be in touch with those governments and stress how important this is and what an opportunity it is, say, for, if you look at Saskatchewan, for example. Any money that comes in, any money that's triggered, which probably isn't going to be a whole lot, because as far as I can tell, grains and oilseeds are pretty healthy right now. But any agri-stability money that comes in, that's a 60-cent federal injection into Saskatchewan, and that's going to stay in rural Saskatchewan. So hopefully we're going to see a meeting shortly. We hear there may be another FPT meeting coming up here in the next week or so. And at that point in time, I know Minister Bibeau's office is incredibly invested in this happen.
What is, you mentioned the acronym APF. You better break that down for some of the people that aren't necessarily always in this circle and pounding away the pavement.
Ag policy framework.
Okay.
So the next CAP or growing forward or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Kara has a question here. I'm going to put up on the screen. She asks, we may be getting BRM reform fatigue. How do we keep the importance of this pushing forward? Because we are in a sort of a war of attrition here. For whatever reason, the three prairie provinces are playing a bit of a waiting game and not necessarily saying yes or no. It's just we're investigating. So how do some of your member organizations, APAS in Saskatchewan, CAP in Manitoba, how do they keep this in front of some of the ministers as this just drags out further and further?
Well, I know I've discovered kind of breaks in the channels of communication that have surprised me. So I would encourage everybody who listens to your show to reach out to their MP and their MLA and make sure that they have directly communicated to that person how important this new money into agri-stability is to their community, to their farm, to everyone they know, because you can't assume that they all understand how important it is. And hearing from one more person to say, I really hope our government signs on to this offer from the federal government, can do nothing but good. So I really would encourage Kara and anybody else to make sure, and I mean, if you've already told them, tell them again, because we are probably in the final sprint to the finish line here on BRM. I don't know, other than continuing to sound the alarm, continuing to communicate to our elected officials that this is really important. I think that's the best thing that everybody can do.
Okay, Lindsay says she'll bite. Is CFA submitting suggestions, wishes for the new APF at this point?
Hi, Lindsay. I hope the sun is shining on your sheep farm. We do have an APF committee that is working on this, and they, if you've got any suggestions, please reach out. I believe our chair of that committee is Chris Vanden Heuvel, our second VP, who's in Cape Breton, just on the other side of the storm that's passing through here in PEI today. And the APF committee is leaving no stone unturned. We will certainly be in consultation with government and all the stakeholders to see what we can do to improve BRM. And we're hearing from different players that we could see some pretty significant change to BRM moving forward.
Margin-based, the margin-based sort of insurance program that Minister Dreeshen of Alberta has really been pushing?
I haven't heard no support, and I haven't heard support for that outside of Alberta. But I think they are definitely looking at many different options, and we look forward to getting through this phase of BRM with the hopefully seeing the agri-stability improvements that BIBO has put on the table, seeing those adopted, and then getting to move on to how we might improve the next BRM.
What's CFA's role in the Grain Act review that's going on? This has been a long time coming. There's, for the real true hardcore policy wonks, this is like Christmas. For a lot of the rest of us, we're like, okay, what does this all mean? What are the issues? So what is CFA? What is your role in this, and do you have opinions on some of the matters?
So the Grain Act, we have been a little bit consumed with the BRM file and labor lately, but the Grain Act review is something that we hear for sure from our Western members as something that's an exciting opportunity. We've seen some, a few kind of key items on the wish list that I think you're probably very well in touch with. The third-party inspection, the better forecasting reports like we see out of the USA. And maybe something about falling number 2, I understand. So all of that from CFA's perspective, obviously we will be trying to be as involved as possible with submissions, taking all of the data from, in particular, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario and Quebec, and putting forward a united front on what we would like to see in the Grain Act review. But it's still pretty new, and I know Doug Chorney's still kind of getting his orders from Minister Bibeau, I believe. So we look forward to seeing how that all rolls out.
Yeah, I think comment period's underway, correct? I believe so. So, it's... these sorts of things are interesting because, how do you make sure that, because you have your policy analysts in-house, but how do you also take into account what farmers are feeling out in the countryside on an issue that they're probably not thinking about every day, right? They're thinking about getting ready for spring and things like that. So how do you, and it's just not specific to the Grain Act, but on any issue, how do you try to make sure that you're in step and understanding what some of your members, because you're like CFA, is different than say maybe a wheat commission. Your members are very broad across all the different sectors of ag. So how do you actually balance all that out, and how do you come up with what you want to suggest when there are these opportunities?
So we have a great structure, I think, that facilitates that quite well. And if you consider that sitting around our table, our boardroom table, virtually or in person, we have folks like Todd Lewis from APAS, Bill Campbell from CAP. We've got representatives from all of the provincial GFOs, and then we have commodity representation as well. So the labor file is a great example that touches just about everybody. I don't know any sector, any commodity that's not touched by labor, and how we all come together. And there are some competing interests, but we do recognize as a group that if we don't sort our problems out amongst ourselves, when we go to government, they're just going to divide and conquer. So when we look at a Grain Act review, we will be leaning heavily on our prairie guys and our Ontario and Quebec producers to make sure that we've got good information, that we can have a meaningful submission and lobby for the kind of change that the industry really needs.
What do you do if say like your Ontario group, the OFA, and say let's pick on CAP disagrees? Like, do they both submit their opinions, or is it reconciled under the whole umbrella?
So each of them, I believe, would submit their own presentations in front of whatever standing committee or whatever commission there is doing the Grain Act review. And above and beyond that, CFA will make a presentation that encompasses everything we agree on and put that forward.
Okay. Viewers are going to hear my interview with the special representative of the prairies, Mr. Jim Carr, today on RealAg Radio. And I asked him about the carbon tax. And I know this is something that CFA has been working really hard on, is the exemption to the carbon tax. And as we see increases coming into the future, I think this is not going away. The request for exemption, specifically on things like grain drying, where there is really no alternative besides not growing corn. one of the things that he said to me was he believes this idea of an exemption needs to be relooked at, which I found rather, well, my ears perked up, because I kind of thought this was maybe dead. That is encouraging. We'll see if it goes anywhere. What do you think when you hear him say that?
Did he share anything about agri-stability as well, or
He
just
did. He wanted to. I don't want to. I'm paraphrasing,
no,
but
kidding.
he believes that they want to see the prairie provinces join in, and of course, just like everybody else is sort of waiting. And I asked him why he believed the prairie provinces have not signed on yet, and he says you'll have to ask them. But we believe this is a good deal. The feds have put a lot of money in to bring this thing together, and they want to bring it home. So let's jump back to the carbon
Sure.
tax and the exemption. What do you think when he says something about that?
Well, very interesting. Obviously, we've continued to say that we're price takers. We can't just absorb these costs. So there's got to be and the irony of it, because we are bearing the brunt of climate change. You have a look at the harvest from hell. We had a drought here in eastern Canada last summer. So we need probably more than ever. We need to be able to implement things like grain drying and mitigate the impacts of climate change, which will most likely require activities that are counterproductive to what the carbon tax is trying to do. So we need some kind of incentive. We need some kind of assistance to adopt all of these new changes they're looking for us to reduce our carbon emissions. And we also need to have some reward for all of the good we do, whether you're an apple farmer. I heard Brian from CHC interviewed recently. He sequesters a lot of carbon. And potato guys, maybe not so much, but you talk to your grassland folks, and just generally speaking, there's got to be a more effective cycle for this money, because we are doing so much good environmentally, but we continue to just be penalized for activities that are beyond our control. So I am quite excited to hear that Minister Carr has mentioned that they may be revisiting the exemption. That's great news.
And what I said on the radio show was it's encouraging. The jury is out on action. So that sounds good. Now, how do we close that gap from let's relook at it to actually putting something in motion to create that exemption on that particular issue as the price goes from $30 to $170 over the next 9 years till 2030? Why? You've had a lot of conversations with the government about this carbon tax issue. Why do you think the good part of the recognition of the carbon sequestration that is going on farms across the country, why has that been so ignored?
It's a great question.
Why is it forgotten?
Is it because it's difficult to quantify?
Difficult to quantify by me, but I think there's some scientists out there that would tell you that, hey, I can do the math. So I don't know if that's it either. I've had we've had a number of discussions on RealAg Live and RealAg Radio talking about the carrot versus the stick. And right now you have a Biden administration that is also trying to figure out some of this stuff. But they've been mainly leading with the carrot so far. Now they may get to the stick. Janet Yellen, in her Senate hearing before she was approved as Treasury Secretary, she talked about a price on carbon. So the stick may be coming. We may end up at the same position eventually. But it feels like on the Canadian side we've led with the stick, and there might be some carrots. But boy, all of this whole discussion is really stained by that stick because it's a big one and it hurts.
I think there's a bigger issue at play here too, and that is just appreciation and understanding in the cabinet at large, federally, as to what agriculture and agri-food bring to the Canadian economy as far as jobs and GDP and everything else. And I think if we had a better understanding of that within cabinet, we would have better uptake on carbon tax exemptions, on sequestration credits, on better agri-stability, a lot of things that just seems that for a poor choice of words here, agriculture is kind of the ugly sister in cabinet, which is really unfortunate because we do bring so much. We're the largest employer right behind government in this country.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Now, we have a CFA AGM coming up, but before we get to that, I want to ask you about you've been leading CFA through some, your predecessor, Ron Bonnet, was right in the middle of all the USMCA stuff. Boy, he spent more time in Washington than he did in probably Ottawa at the time. What's been your favorite part about leading CFA?
I don't know if I ever told you I had a text one night from Ron saying, okay, as far as crises go, you win.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
Ron.
Ron certainly did a great job, and I certainly call on him a lot still for advice and as a bit of a sounding wall. So I think some of the really exciting things that I've seen at CFA is the collaboration within our community at large. I think generally speaking, the idea that we need to get better recognition across the board for what agriculture brings to Canada. We'll get there if we are able to stand together, all our commodities united, and kind of park that 5% that divides us and focus on the 95% that unites us. So I think building those relationships has been one of the best things I've seen at CFA in the last, I can't believe it's been 2 years at the end of this month.
Yeah, I remember shortly after you became president, we had done an interview. Shortly after, we've done many since then, but I definitely the 2 years has gone very, very fast. So, CFA AGM coming up. What does that look like in this virtual world?
Oh, well, I know our team is working to make it as personal as possible. We're having an event the night of the 23rd, right? So that's Canada's Ag Day is the 23rd, and that evening, I believe, or no, sorry, the night of the 23rd, we're having a virtual mixology event with Spirits Canada, which should be kind of fun. So everyone will be able to log in and take part in that.
BYOB,
And then
like a true BYOB.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah. But nobody has to get a cab home, we don't think. So that's the upside.
This is true.
And then we're going to have meetings the 24th through to the 26th, and kind of interesting to see. Aaron O'Toole will be one of our speakers. We also had a request from Blanchette from Quebec to speak. So he too will be speaking, and there's some rumbling that we may even have a presentation from the PM himself. So it'll be interesting to see those heavy hitters paying some attention to agriculture. I think that's pretty exciting. We've got some wonderful panels planned. We've got one on BRM, because what would life be without a BRM panel? And looking at some policy options for the future of BRM. We've got one on generating income from greenhouse gas offset credits, and one from our downstream stakeholders' perspective on unleashing agri-food's potential path forward. So some really neat panels, and I would really encourage anybody, if you have time, to partake, because I think it's $125 for members to register to attend. Normally it's over 500, and then you've got travel and hotel and bar tabs on top of that. So this is a great opportunity for people that might not normally get to attend. So we'll have our normal resolution process and some great guest speakers. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be very exciting.
Big question of all that: if the Prime Minister does give an address to the CFA meeting, will he do it from in front of his house?
With Joe Biden on his front step with his mittens on?
Yeah, Bernie.
Bernie.
Hey, great stuff. Mary, really appreciate you joining us here today on RealAg Live, and great stuff. Big issues to be dealt with. That TFW one, boy, that's pressing. That is immediate, because that has impact right away here in the springtime. So all the best working on that file.
Great. Thanks, Shaun. Appreciate it, and appreciate everything you do. Looking forward to the the top 50 players in Canada. Have you seen this through Agribition?
The release in the list, I think sometime here in February, aren't they?
Yeah, it's going to be released, I think, at Canada's Ag Day.
Oh,
And
really? Okay, cool.
neat panel of judges. I got to be one of the judges.
Oh,
And what
nice.
an exciting list. Some fantastic nominees. I think lots of stuff to be proud of in our ag community here across the country. Lots of talent, passion, and dedication. Should be good.
Yeah, it'd be a fun thing to cover and kind of going through that list for sure. Hey, Mary, really appreciate it. All the best to you, and thanks a lot for joining us here today.
Take care, Shaun. Thanks.
Okay, I want to remind everybody that you can, if you missed any of that, you can go to realagriculture.com/live to watch the archive. What you can also do is tune into Real Ag Radio today, 4:30 Eastern, 2:30 Mountain. It's brought to you by Atlas XC today as our virtual sponsor. But the most important thing is we have a great conversation with Jason Newton about the commodity markets. And as well as I alluded to earlier in my discussion with Mary, we talked to the special representative to the prairies with the federal government, Mr. Jim Carr, and talking about what that role is. And he talks about the carbon tax, and he says some interesting things that I think you are going to want to hear, especially if you're really bothered by this issue. Maybe it's not done yet. Maybe there still is hope. We will see. We're going to be pushing on that one for sure. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Live, and we'll talk again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.